So if you're wondering about your debt and want to know what to do about it, you're facing a debt dilemma, you're in the right place. We're waiting a minute or so to see if anybody else signs on. You have reached, of course, you're at Legal Aid of Arkansas. You're on our Facebook page. So we're going to start in a minute. Debt dilemma is how to prevail. That's what you want to do, win against the IRS if you have debt. We are here to talk about it in a minute or so. We have some experts here today to talk about how to prevail against the IRS when you have debt. We've titled our presentation, Debt Dilemmas, How to Prevail Against the IRS. We're going to start in a minute or so. Hello, and welcome to the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic's Facebook Live, brought to you by Legal Aid of Arkansas. My name is Jennifer Gardiner, and I am the director of the Tax Clinic at Legal Aid. We represent low-income taxpayers in their controversies with the IRS. We also educate taxpayers in their tax rights and responsibilities. If you have a question at any time during this brief presentation, please submit it to us right away, and we will get our panel to answer it live. If you're watching this on a recording, you can still put your question in Facebook, and we will answer your question. Today, I have Leslie McLean from an LITC in Arizona. She will introduce herself later in the program. So here is the outline of the issues we're going to confront briefly today. Make sure to jump on any tax notices you get. If you have a tax issue, don't wait. Why is your return going to be is it being delayed? We're talking mostly today about collection alternatives and why do you owe the IRS? And, you know, should you change your withholding? Did you have canceled debt and that has a tax impact? And how can you address that? So the first topic we want to talk about is returns delayed in processing. And Leslie, I'm going to turn to you and so you introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah. Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you are. I'm Leslie McLean. I'm the director of the Low Income Taxpayer Clinic at DNA People's Legal Services. We're a legal aid organization in Northern Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, with offices on the Navajo and Hopi reservations also. And we help folks pretty much like Arkansas Legal Aid resolve controversies with the IRS, or we provide consultations to folks who have questions about matters involving the Internal Revenue Service. So yeah, returns delayed in processing and you can't figure out why. So you filed your tax return, you're expecting a refund, and it doesn't come. So what are your options? I would recommend the first thing you might want to do is get on Where's My Refund with the Internal Revenue Service. They have a website that you can go to, www.where'smyrefund.gov, and it will you know, tell you what you need. You'll need your social security number, your filing status. You'll need to know the exact amount of the refund you were expecting. And it will usually be able to tell you where, or tell you that your return, it hasn't been received. So there are three possibilities. The return was received, The refund was approved and then the refund was set. If you put all your information in and nothing comes up, it's possible the IRS didn't get your return. So
Wait, Leslie, but what do I do if wait, I submitted my return. Why would the IRS not have it?
well, for one thing, you might think you submitted it, but if someone electronically filed it for you, or even if you electronically filed it and didn't get a confirmation that it was accepted by the IRS, you're going to want to double check that that it wasn't rejected out. Sometimes a paid preparer won't tell you that, they send it in and they're not always as good about following up on it. It depends where you've had your return filed. If you filed it yourself, usually when you e-file, whatever platform, whatever software company you're using, will send you notice that you've either been rejected or accepted.
So a lot of our clients are getting a message that says the return is in processing, but here it is the end of May. That's frustrating.
Yeah, so that is true. That's happening. And a lot of times that could be because your return was picked for this new ID verification program that the Internal Revenue Service has. And at that point, it's worth a call to the IRS. And you can call on their taxpayer service number, 1-800-829-1040, I believe that is.
And we're going to put that in the chat so you know how to reach customer service. 800-829-1040. Yep.
Yep. Also, if you try calling and you don't have success, or you're not getting anywhere with the Internal Revenue Service, that might be when it's time to turn to one of your low-income taxpayer clinics for assistance, to ask them if they can help you with the situation. A lot of times, if it is ID verification, it then becomes a process of trying to do some things online with the IRS. And if you don't have that ability or capacity, then you might want to get help from your low-income taxpayer clinic, or from a tax preparer if they're still available and willing to help you.
Right. And be persistent, because sometimes one thing we've noticed is that people move and then the IRS actually has tried to contact them, but they changed addresses. So hopefully they can call early in the morning to customer service and find out the reason for the processing delay. And maybe they can just figure out that, oh, the IRS sent a notice and they didn't get it. That's right. One thing that's happened to our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I find that those numbers you usually can get them. There's a 2-hour period after 5 o'clock, at least where we are. So after 5 is always a good time to try and call. And sometimes, and you can only use where's my refund for the current year and the prior 2 years. So that if it's a return that's later than that, you're going to have to call or have someone help you with getting in touch with the IRS anyway.
So one thing, speaking of notices, that we just mentioned that you could have gotten a notice. A lot of people this month have gotten a collection notice. Most of those collection notices are just coming out because you filed a tax return for 2023 and you didn't send in the payment because you owed, and the IRS says, wait a second, where's your payment? Now, a lot of those notices are disturbingly blunt, that you need to pay. I think they use the words right away, and they tell you the date.
And Jennifer, is that true? Do you have to pay right away?
No, well, no, because there's always an alternative. And it does scare people. It definitely scares people that something awful is going to happen if they don't pay right away. So we're going to talk briefly about what your alternatives are when you owe money to the IRS. And that could be either when you owe money for a prior year or a current year. When you get that notice, you really want to act, try to act right away and decide, what am I going to do next? So these are not mutually exclusive, but each one is a first step. So the first could be a first step for you, and then we could move on to something else. So when you get the notice, the IRS actually has a program where you can get a one-time extension to full pay. So if you get a notice that says you owe $800 and you think you can full pay it within 120 days, the IRS has this program where you call up and you say, could I just have an extension? You could also apply through the mail, but to me, that's sort of silly, because how you're even going to hear back from the IRS? Who knows when you will hear back? So you call them up. Remember that customer service number. You could also call collections and say, I want this 120-day extension to full pay. Now, interest and penalties apply. So if you could pay within that 120 days, in my mind, just pay it within the 120 days and sort of ignore you've got to pay it within 30 days, it says on the notice, and just pay it within 120 days, and nothing bad's going to happen in that 120 days. So we sort of, at our LITC, we sort of think that's a silly little option, but here's the best thing in my mind. The only good thing about this: they will not send you any notices during that 120 days. No reminders.
So Jennifer, they're not gonna levy my wages?
No, but they weren't going to levy your wages in 120 days anyways. So not to put this, this option, into the trash bin, but it does mean you won't get any notices during that time, because they're not going to expect your payment, but they are going to expect you in the 120 days. Okay, I thought of another. There's another advantage. They will give you a payoff. When you call for the 120-day extension, they will tell you, well, at the end of the 120 days, if you pay this on the 119th day, you will owe $841.80, whatever it is. They'll compute it for you. And you go, I only owed 800. Yep. Well, there are penalties and interest. So they'll tell you, this is how much you have to pay if you get in before that 120 days. So the second option is, if you can afford to, you set up a payment plan. Now, the IRS really wants you to set it up online, and Leslie's going to talk about payment plans a little bit in a minute. They charge you a lower fee to set up a payment plan if you do it online rather than calling. We urge you not to send up a payment plan if you can't make the payment, because you're going to pay that fee, and then if you end up defaulting, you've just increased the amount you're ending up paying. So that really wasn't a good idea. So what most of our clients do is get into a non-collectible status. And to get into non-collectible status, you have to show the IRS that you're in a financial hardship and cannot afford to pay. That means you can pay $0 every month, and you have to make a demonstration. It's not easy to make that demonstration. We do that a lot for clients. You have to show that your allowable expenses exceed your income on a monthly basis, or at least for right now. Currently it's temporary, but it's a great relief to people who need not to be bothered by these constant notices that say they owe money and they just can't pay. Now,
but if I'm in currently not collectible, and then the following year I have a refund, will I get it, Jennifer?
Yeah, no. It still means you owe the money, and it still means that your refunds, the IRS still wants your money. So if they see that you're going to get a refund, they will offset it. Now, we've had programs, we talked about getting what the IRS calls hardship refunds when you owe money, but you're in an extreme hardship. Those aren't really easy to get, but we do get a half dozen or so of those every year in February, March, when people come to us and say, oh my gosh, I owe money, but I can't even pay my rent. So that's something to consider. You put it sort of in the back of your mind when we put you into currently non-collectible status, that maybe you could still get your refund, which mostly is, earned income tax credit, and help you pay your rent and your car payment. So if you're not collectible, if you think you can't pay now, what if you think you can never pay this debt? So somebody already read the outline here and wrote us a question. It says, how can I apply for an offer in compromise? We actually get a lot of inquiries about offers in compromise, and that's because out there in TV land, there were a lot of services who will help you file an offer in compromise for money, but of course, our legal aid programs, the LITCs, we don't charge anything. So for an offer, you basically have to demonstrate you don't have any assets, like a piece of land sitting there that you could sell, or a collectible or something, no assets. You can't pay it out of your income. And guess what? My income's not going to really go up in the future. So I don't think I can ever pay. Now, it's not easy to apply for an offer. We do lots and lots of offers. I'm sure Leslie does offers too. We understand that they get tens of thousands of offers at the IRS every year, but they don't grant them really often. So if you want to investigate this option, we really think you need to look at it very hard and get a helper to submit a successful offer. The downside is if you submit a bad offer, they reject it. The statute of limitations, that's the time period that the IRS can collect your debt, just got longer. So you prolonged the agony and didn't get anywhere. So we were always counseling people, don't submit a bad offer.
And Jennifer, what are you seeing as the turnaround on those offers? I mean, for
that's a really good question. I have a chart, and the best we ever did was, if we can convince the IRS to expedite it, only happened a couple times, 3 months. The longest it's taken when we get into a real big back and forth and it's just so painful, 14 months. Somewhere in the middle, 6 months, 7 months. And that means that it's just not your turn. They haven't opened it up. So we wanted to talk about what I consider our success stories. And it really is that the story goes like this. A client calls us because they get a tax due notice. Then they immediately call the IRS, and the IRS says, okay, we'll set up a payment plan for you. And the person on the phone, the taxpayer goes, okay. And now they're in a payment plan that they can't afford. They come to us because they're saying, oh, I don't understand. They told me I had to pay $200 a month, and there's no way I can afford that. And then we look at their financials, and this happens over and over again. We look at their financials, and we discover that they really don't have any money every month to pay the IRS. So we then get them into current uncollectible. And Leslie said, but sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we had someone recently or come in and had years and years of under withholding and didn't pay the tax debt. And then, when collections started being, after the pandemic, during the pandemic, collections were kind of stalled, right? They weren't sending out collection notices, but recently, in the last 6 months, we've seen a lot of folks getting those collection notices and they want to do something about it. sometimes folks can, afford an installment payment, and we just need to work with them to come up with what that number is and make sure that it's reasonable and that they can actually afford it. Because if they breach the plan or don't make the payments, then they're right back in collections again. They're right back where they started from. So it ideally, sometimes folks will come to me and say, I owe this money, and I can look and see, yeah, you owe it, you under withheld, and we're going to talk about under withholding. But and they'll say, but I can't pay it. But then when we look at it, they can pay it. And if they're wage earners, it's so much better to set up an installment payment plan than having the IRS come after their wages. Yeah, withholding at your job, what you need to know. So there's a form called a W-4 that when you start a wage earning job, when you have an employer, you have to fill that out. And there is the W-4 right there. And pretty much, the W-4 is designed except for steps 2, 3, and 4, for someone who's just a single wage earner in the family. And then according to the IRS withholding charts, they're going to figure out how much to take out. But sometimes when you have more than one job, you're going to under withhold. Or if you have self-employment, if you have employment where no one's taking out any withholding, you can take that into account with your W-4 at your job. And what we help people do, because this form isn't really all straightforward, is we help folks who have under withheld or recognize that, oh, well, my spouse works and I work, we need to account for that, fill out the W-4s so that there's more accurate withholding. An easy way to do it is go down to step 4, where if someone will come into me and, for example, they owe $2,400 in taxes for that year, and they under withheld, and we can sit down and look at, well, what would you need to have withheld in order to not have that happen if everything else is going to stay the same? And we can just help them with step 4 with an extra withholding down in 4C there. So those are the things that, again, we do consults with people at our LITC. I don't know if you do, Jennifer, to help them with the W-4. You can ask if you have a good human resources payroll department at your job. You can go there and they'll help you understand this form, it can be confusing.
So one problem that we've confronted is that people don't understand that they can go to human resources, can go to payroll, and payroll has really got to follow the taxpayer's directions.
Yeah.
It's not that payroll works for the IRS. The payroll says, hey, you can go the other way. You can have less withheld. And we sometimes tell people, go to payroll and get them, because you're waiting all this time for your refund, and you could have had more money to buy your groceries during the year. And then, look at this, here we are in May and you didn't get your refund, but you could have had a lower refund and more money during the year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some payroll companies like ADP, it's a big payroll company, your W-4 is right there available for you. You can pull it up and see what you're having withheld and whether or not you have to change that. Others you're going to have to go, talk to your payroll department or human resources. But I do have clients come in and say, my employer is not taking out enough money. And really your employer should be taking out what you've told them to take out, depending upon how you filled out your W-4. So unfortunately, it's your problem, right? But you can get help for it.
We're changing our topics now. We're going to go to a form that some people get and some people don't get, but that was sent to the IRS.
Yeah, a 1099-C. Usually, I mean, if someone is, and that is generated as a result of debt being canceled. So for example, if you have credit card debt and the credit card company has tried to collect and then they write it off, right? They say, we're not going to try to collect from you anymore. For whatever reason, we don't think you're ever going to pay this, so we have to take it off our books, but it's income to you is what they're saying. So we're going to give you a 1099-C. And if you receive one of these, and like Jennifer said, sometimes they send it to you, sometimes they don't have a current address, so you don't get it. But the IRS always gets a copy of it. So if you do have one, you need to take it into consideration when you file your tax return. One thing that I think is important for folks to know is when you get the 1099-C, to try and address it right away and decide, was this issued properly? You know, did I really have cancellation of debt? Was I really the debtor, you know, on this loan? We've had folks who have co-signed for other people, and they're not really responsible for the debt if they don't have control of the asset. So that's a little more complicated. 1099-C can be very confusing. And I really highly recommend that if you get a 1099-C, you get help understanding it and determining right away, because, you know, if the 1099-C was for debt that was forgiven 2 or 3 years ago, it's going to be more difficult to figure out whether or not it can be excluded from your income, because not all forgiveness of debt income is taxable.
So when we were talking about this the other day, you said, pull up your credit report.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we have folks do, because you're going to have to determine at the date of cancellation whether what you owed people was more than what you own, right? That's called your balance sheet. And in order to do that, a credit report is really helpful, because it can help us determine what you owed at the date of cancellation. And it has to be exactly, you know, it has to be on that date. And a lot of folks just don't know, you know, what they owed.
And so you request a credit report on phone, or how do you do that?
How do you get a credit report? So there is a there is a site. And we'll put it in the chat. Sorry, I don't think it's on this slide, is it?
No, it's not on the slide.
Okay, it's www.nationalcreditreport.com. And if you go on there, you can provide the information, and then you can get 3 credit reports. We actually help folks get their credit reports, so we'll get them online, on the phone or on Zoom, and we'll have them call and get their credit reports with us helping them. We have instructions also that I apologize, didn't make it to this, but we have instructions for getting your free credit report that we can provide.
We have the instructions, and we're going to put them into the chat on Facebook.
Okay. Oh,
so
good.
and the application, so that helps you figure out whether you're insolvent.
Right. So if you are insolvent, that was the question that came up in the chat. Yes, if you are insolvent at the time of the cancellation of debt. So let's just say someone canceled your debt on December 31st, 2023. Then you need to be able to come up with your balance sheet, your personal balance sheet, what you owned and what you owed at that time. And if you owed more than what you own, then all or some of your canceled debt can be excluded from your income. And there is a worksheet, and you use a form 982 to claim these exclusions. And there is a worksheet that the IRS provides to help you determine that. And we help folks with that process.
And then, of course, we have a lot of clients at Legal Aid who are bankrupt.
Right. So if the debt was excused in bankruptcy, then it's excludable also.
Okay. And then
It shouldn't have,
then
so this is where it becomes important to determine whether or not that 1099-C was issued properly.
darn, I mean, it does sound tough.
Yeah. And if
to-
someone is just insolvent, Jennifer, it's often easier to use the 982 and prove the insolvency than to try and get a creditor to correct the 1099-C, unfortunately.
Right, right. But either way, then if you can exclude the income, then it gets moved out of your taxable income and you don't pay tax on it.
That's right. And it's important, if you can, to file that 982 when you're filing your original return. It's always best to do it that way if you can, rather than to wait for the IRS to send you a collection notice, because then we're back in collections because they're going to assess the tax.
Right. And as let's go all the way full circle, sometimes we don't get the 1099-C, which is really unfortunate, because the
Yep.
banks tend to, who knows, they lost you or they didn't send a copy to the taxpayer.
Yep.
So hope that we've made this clear as Maude about how to exclude your canceled debt. It is very confusing to our taxpayers, and we get a lot of questions on this.
Yep. And that's why we're there to help.
And that's why we're there to help. So on this screen is our contact information. There's Leslie's organization, DNA, with their phone number. You can call her. You can also go on their website, Say More Us. You can apply for help online. You can apply for help by calling us. Either way, we get online applications on the weekends, of course, because we're not there on the weekends, but those are alternatives. Remember that you can still, even though we're going to sign off in a minute, write us a question here on Facebook, and we'll be happy to answer it, or call us. And thank you again for taking part. We will see you next month for our June Facebook Live. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jennifer. Bye.